Welcome to KIMEcast, where we break through and cut the BS in sports medicine, rehabilitation, and sports performance, and talk about how things really work. Welcome to KIMEcast. Tony Mikla, Evan Halger, Russ Dunning, Aaron Crouch. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about really this idea of physical therapy and what happens maybe in the postgraduate phases. So after you're in school and then as you graduate from school, what are those next steps? And then what are these steps you would take for the rest of your career, I would say, too. We really want to talk about some of the debates that are out there as far as, do I go to continuing education for residency work or fellowship work or more specialist work, or do I find a mentor in the community? And we'll tell you about our experiences and what we've done to shed some light on that, and those of you that are interested in just the profession in general, like kind of what that looks like. So, but before we get rolling, let's see, Evan, what are we drinking here, man?
All right, we got another local Sacramento beer. This is Track 7. It's a little sticky. They bottled it a little incorrectly. This is Left Eye, Right Eye. It's a double IPA, 8.5%. So we get rolling with something aggressive again.
You're tough on not only the beer but how it's manufactured as well.
Well, I mean, take a look at this. My hand is a mess now.
Maybe from the fridge.
Yeah, there's other reasons, maybe. I don't know.
Fair.
Who knows?
Could have been in transport.
It's something we don't really want to know. Anyways, pour the beer.
Moving on. Moving forward.
Hey.
So a little background on physical therapy. Those of you listening may not be PTs or may not know exactly what it goes into. So with PT school, the way it works out is you're going through your undergrad program, and then you have to meet certain prerequisites and requirements to apply for grad school. And so there's a certain amount of classes that you take. Most of it's pretty heavy in chemistry, biochem, physiology, exercise physiology, psychology, etc. And then you apply for grad school and take the GRE, and then you get into grad school. And then in grad school is really designed, PT school is really all about a really generalist approach of the human body and starting to look at pathology and movement dysfunctions. We look at the big systems like neurophysiology, cardiology, musculoskeletal, and then we look at the skin or the integumentary system, which is really probably the largest organ in the body, interestingly enough. But PTs actually can do some wound care, wound debridement and stuff in a burn unit or some of those environments, which is interesting and quite far from what we do as clinicians in today's day in sports med. But it's always a part to understand because that plays a big role in outcomes. But nonetheless, as you graduate from that program, I think the common finding we have, as post students ourselves and students we've talked to and colleagues, is no one ever feels prepared leaving physical therapy school to go into the clinic and boom, just start treating. Like everybody I've always talked to always feels like, I didn't feel like I learned anything, right? And I would counter that and say, well, that's not true at all. You learned a ton, and you've learned a ton of evaluation skills and a lot of concepts, and you've learned kind of how to assess and how to critically think is probably, I think, the biggest thing you get from school. But what you don't get is a ton of experience. So one thing that school doesn't give you is as much residency as you might get in some other fields like medicine, where we do internships and rotations, but they're fairly brief. So you're looking at maybe 6 to 9 months of total time in the clinic before you come out, and usually those are spread out amongst different settings, where you're in a hospital setting, you're in an outpatient orthopedic setting, you might be in a neurological setting or a transitional care environment with a nursing home or something like that. So you're really getting this diverse education, which is amazing, and I think actually serves serves a purpose. Yeah, it serves a purpose very, very well, which is often overlooked and debatable. But that's a little background on kind of how you get to the point of becoming a PT, and then from there it's really like, let's now how do I master my craft? And our craft certainly is sports med and working with folks that are active and wanting to be active and challenging their bodies and in maybe athletic ways or active ways. So we're going to focus mostly sports medicine, musculoskeletal for our development and for our kind of history, but just to kind of lay the groundwork there of some of those options. So there's quite a bit of debate right now in our field. Is do you just go into the clinic and start working for a group? Do you find a mentor and follow that person? Do you hire a mentor maybe and have someone be remote that guides you? Or do you do a residency program where you apply for residency and then you go through this long-term process? Usually it's a year-long process. It's either focused heavy on orthopedic clinical specialties and working with your hands and manual therapy, or it's focused heavily on sports, which really looks more like athletic training, like being on the field with athletes and preventing injury and dealing with on-the-field injuries more so than truly sports rehab in my experience.
And that one's really tough because our license doesn't really cover that. So there's
Right.
kind of like a
Bit of a gray area.
Yeah, there's a bit of a
right?
gray area there with that one.
I think you leave as a really, really good generalist from school, as you should. I mean, I think every new therapist that does feel a bit overwhelmed, or they feel like they don't know anything when they walk into the clinic that they finally want to be in, and they see maybe very tenured therapists in that facility that are being the master, they almost want to judge themselves completely off of, that's my benchmark right now. But in reality, just like they are in the moment, that therapist had tremendous baseline skills at their age at that time and probably felt the same way when maybe they saw a future mentor of theirs. So I think it's critical to put the minds at ease for new therapists to say, you have the tools, just like you said, to get the job done and to be very good at being reactive to things that come in that you may feel like you're not prepared for, but you own the basics. Own your anatomy, own your physiology, and understand that, because that's going to be the root of how you communicate to someone, whether it's, you know, the simple orthopedic issue or it's that high-level athlete that comes in looking for some expertise. You can serve both those people if you have a strong foundation in basics, and then how you fill the gap is, I think, where we want to tailor this conversation.
Yes, I met Mark Verstegen as a young therapist. I did my first internship at Athletes Performance and worked with Mark, who now runs Exos and was the founder there. It's a tremendous training facility. So, but his number one line at the time was, "Do the simple things savagely well."
Yes, love it.
And it's carried on forever. And that was 2004, so 16 years ago or so here. And looking at that and the process that Mark laid out as far as how to organize a training program and how to work with somebody is something that we use today, and it's kind of the foundation of how we put programs together for a rehab client or for a performance training client. And having that structure of knowing how to fill these certain blocks, very, very simple concept of filling these blocks. And the same thing is true when you come out of school, is that you know how to evaluate each of these blocks, and they're really the same blocks. So it's just a tremendous structure to look at these different segments and just look at starting how do we fill those gaps, and then from there progressive rehabilitation.
Well, I mean, I think you look at really what physical therapy is we're coaching people. And so we become this really interesting person in people's lives. We influence them with our hands. We influence them with how we investigate the problem and identify their dysfunction. We have to communicate that and put together a plan, and then really implement it with corrective exercise and coaching with a program, and create an environment for them to succeed in. And there's so many components that lead to that success that I see students come out and they're really not sure about what their limiting factor is as an influencer, as a coach. And I think a lot of people just think, well, I just need to put my hands on a lot of people, or I need to do a residency, I just need to see it done a bunch of times. But really at the end of it, we are interacting with another human. And that skill of influence is so critical. And it's really hard to get good at that without actually starting to do it. And I think that's why when I'm looking at students that are coming out, or if they're in school, if say they're in college and they're thinking about going into grad school, and what can I do now? It's like, that's really simple. What sport were you involved with? Start coaching. Are you involved with any fitness training? Pick up a few clients. Start influencing people, because that skill set is really how you apply the technical aspect of biomechanics and pathophysiology and healing and touch. You have to have a mode, and that's so oftentimes the limiting factor of a student that's been in academia for too long.
Yeah. I was going to say, just it kind of, as you think about from what you said about being the coach or learning about what you don't do well and putting yourself in those environments to improve yourself. I think for my own personal experience in first joining, I guess, this company a while ago, we really recommend every therapist that is with us is to coach at some point, whether it's coach a small class, whether it's coach an entire gym floor, whether it's coach a sports team, whatever it may be. But one of my more personal growth points was joining the gym side of things as a coach myself. As I know very much about myself, about having my weakest point being engaging with people, like a very strong introvert, where I would just kind of like basically observe and probably figure it out from there, and not really putting myself out there to talk to, I don't know, you could call them strangers, I guess, but in a crowd of people, I will not just be the one to talk to everyone. I can absolutely promise you that. If I can find a shadow, I'll sit in it all day. But one of the most powerful things that I went through and was joining the gym and being around a very influential coach that we are thankful to be around all the time is Vince Minnie and then Gabe Jackson. And both those guys get deep into people's lives like I've never seen before. And they connect with people in ways that I've never done myself. And I felt like when I was with them, that was like the key piece I needed to have the confidence on the PT side to develop relationships while my own skill set with my hands and my exercise progression was developing. Like I learned so much just being in that environment that I know I could not have gotten in any classroom setting, but that I had these like mentors around me to learn how to engage with a more younger crowd in an effective way, or to engage with an adult that sees me as someone that doesn't have a lot of life experience. And for me personally, that I think having a mentor that way was super powerful. So piggybacking on what you said about.
And from what you guys
coaches.
are saying, there's kind of three buckets to fill here, right? Like there's the communication side of things, which you're saying was your limiting factor that you learned from coaching. There's hands, and then there's like the exercise side of things, progressions and technique and all of that. Mm-hmm. And maybe the limiting factor for each new therapist might be a little different based on their experiences, right? Like some people might come in with extremely extroverted, very good at communicating, but maybe their hands are terrible. I think we've had maybe a couple of therapists that came in that realm, right? And so it's, as a mentor, then your job is to figure out which bucket needs to be filled and how do you help them fill that. What are the tools to help them do that?
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Yeah. And one mentor of mine, Lenny Macrina, shout out Lenny on this. He's got an Instagram somewhere. The one thing he said to me that was super powerful for him, his first experience leaving school was going down to Birmingham, and he said he would treat 30 people a day. Mm-hmm. And he said he built this incredible bank of watching 30 people move and helping 30 people go through a process every single day. And he did it for, I don't know, I can't remember how many years, a number of years, but he said even today he like goes back to those like huge bank of people, and he relies on that experience. So to your point, sometimes probably experience is the best thing. When people go through these residency programs, there's very little treatment.
Yeah.
It's much more school than treatment. And so,
or that it's individualized, right? So
Yeah.
you find a mentor that sees those three buckets in yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and they can quickly identify like, okay, you need development here. Let's spend some time, focus time there.
Yeah.
And then we'll eventually get to the other stuff if there's little holes, but this is where you need to work on the best to unlock your potential, which I feel like you don't get in the classroom. You get surrounding yourself by people who do it at a high level.
right.
Yeah, I was exposed to that early on the coaching front, and I think it drastically impacted my development before I was a clinician. So being at the University of Arizona with the basketball team, it was just being around phenomenal coaching, phenomenal athletes, seeing it every day, getting involved in the weight room and just being present, frankly, just learned a ton during that process. And then I went to, when I went to PT school, I went to UOP in Stockton, and I had an opportunity. I'd gotten my CSCS already while I was an undergrad because my first PT job was as an aide, and the PT was like, hey, Tony, I'm going to get my CSCS. You should get it if you want to do sports and orthopedics. You'll benefit you. You should get it, and you're eligible for it once you graduate. But I was only a junior at the time. She's like, well, you could take the test now, and then they'll just give you the cert when you're done. And I was like, okay. So I was already in exercise phys, and I was in the weight room with the D1 program, so I was ready to go. So I took the test, got it, which was amazing. Of course, didn't use it at first. And then, but I went to UOP. I was like, yeah, I have my CSCS, and I'm a PT student. And he's like, you're hired. And so the hours were 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. And then I went to PT school from 8 to 5. And then I worked again from about 5 to 7:30 p.m. every night. So it was amazing, though. So Todd Smith was the director of performance at UOP at the time, who's now at Marquette. Phenomenal strength coach. And it was great because then in coaching with him, he had me write programs, he had me coach, and I had to influence groups of 10 to 25 athletes at a time. And Todd was always after me. He's like, Tony, you gotta get louder. Can't hear on the other side of the room, brother.
Oh, yeah.
Can't hear you. He's just yelling. Can't, you're standing right next to him. He's like, can't hear you. Yeah. You're like, bro, come on. Like, that's just not me. It's like, well, you got to make it you if you want to be here. So teach you how to find that voice. Teach you how to reach people. And then, of course, he was a quality stickler as well, as far as, let's do it well, let's do it right. So really, really amazing help there. And for that reason, we're super passionate about finding people coaching opportunities, because I know it shaped me so much in my process to, if I understood that level and how to communicate to the group, how to evaluate a group, how to see these big volumes of people move, really helped you with your movement eye and seeing it, helped you with communication. Didn't really help you hands-on, but that's the piece that you kind of get afterwards once you get in the clinic and get rolling. So, but yeah, I think to that point, there's no better experience than coaching, which we've all said already, and I think that's a big one. And there's no residency program that does that. So I think that's a consideration to make. Is if I was to give a therapist at any position a piece of advice, it'd be coach a group, coach multiple people, because then you get to see movement at a high level. You really get to appreciate cueing and how brief your speech should be, how pointed it should be. And then you certainly get to appreciate also challenge and load and engagement. There's much more to movement and fitness than every little detail of the body.
Or just coaching someone's life.
Yeah.
Right.
How do you connect with someone?
Right.
Get them to do what you know it's best for them to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe they don't want to.
I mean, going to that, I think like some of the best counselors or people in mental health, it's less about what they say and more about how they listen and how they allow the person in front of them to really speak, find truth within their own life, and then create action based on that truth. It's that deep, active listening and the true empathy that comes with that ear and that attitude and that character. And so, we love the coaching, because I think when I think of a coach, I think of one person in front of 15 and taking command of a room, taking them through a warm-up, taking them through some lessons, and then finding out the weak spots and developing that. But it is also about getting and finding why is someone not successful that day or that week or in that season, and hearing their story and caring for that person. And that is free to do. That is, anyone can join in that in any community event and try and make a difference in someone's life with less of your words and more of your active listening engagement in their life. And so much of what I think of what I do as a therapist has so much less to do than teaching a hinge or helping them flex their lumbar spine. It's bringing life to this table and into this gym and into this floor space and making it real and helping them connect the dots that if they do these things well, they're going to achieve what they really want to achieve. And when we bring that loop in, this is a done deal. This is really, frankly, really simple what we do. And if we miss that, it's a dead experience.
But what that requires is passion, right? So you can't do that if you're not incredibly passionate about helping the person or the group in front of you in that moment. And so I think that's what we've tried to kind of create here from a mentorship and fellowship program, is trying to help the therapists that we hire and the people that go through this program to figure out what they're passionate about, because you really can only speak to a population or speak to a person when you truly care, which comes from a passionate place, I think.
Yeah. One of the biggest questions we ask them is, what drives them? What drives them? Why did what brought them to this field? What brought them to, I don't know, why they get up in the morning? So I'm so curious about people, because it is driven by an intense passion to make some level of an impact. And your skill set, your communication, your connection with people really just strengthens when, I don't know, you have some visceral backing behind like your every action, your every word.
Yeah, I think disclaimer, none of us have done a residency.
Yeah.
There's a tone. Nor have we done a fellowship.
I don't think they would have guessed that.
No, I'm sure not. But so something to consider. Also, something to consider is that each of us really selected intense internship opportunities that probably functioned as a residency to some degree. It wasn't called that, but Aaron was with San Francisco Giants and really went out on a limb to get there and be a part of that during their spring training prep period, and phenomenal experience again, where you get this hundreds of guys coming through and working with a master in the craft.
I almost want to elaborate there because it's kind of funny. But but with those experiences, I will say, because it does allow like talking points. It's so critical. I was telling, I think I was telling a client this morning when I was treating that there's power in ourselves as clinicians getting hurt, because you have a relation or an understanding of what the person that is dealing with, that you're working with, that you've actually been injured in that way. But anyways, when I work with a baseball player, when I was fortunate enough to have a short stint with the Giants, which for me was like heaven because I'm a Giants fan since growing up, and it was like my dream to work with them. And I found after the experience that I could be more impactful in a community. That's one of the reasons why I necessarily don't want to pursue it. But when I was there, it was phenomenal because whenever I talk to a pitcher now, especially a youth pitcher that comes in with elbow pain, shoulder pain, whatever it may be, and they're in the developmental phase of their life. I think that's a nice way of saying they're weak. I will kind of do some P&F drills on the table, just kind of get their cuff engaged to do other things. And they'll be in sideline ER, and I'll be hovering over them and like putting 2 fingers on their wrists and just like beating them every time. Beating them as in not allowing their arm to come up, for those not visually seeing me right now. But because beating is 2 meetings, right? Never mind. Anyways, sorry. I don't know if you guys picked up that one, but
you're winning.
Anyways, I'm winning. And I tell them, okay, I worked with Matt Cain when I was there, which was a fun experience growing up and watching him a lot. And no joke, he'd be in the same position, sideline, external rotation, and I would have to get up over top of him, put both hands down like I'm doing CPR to hold him, and to do eccentric and concentric contractions in ER. And I tell all the pitchers that story that I work with because I'm like, this is a man, and obviously it's a grown man, and he's thrown however many innings in the bigs and so many innings in his life, but he has the shoulder girdle of like, I don't know, the strongest person you could possibly think of. Of Matt Cain. That's what it is. He's just him. Just him. And I think those type of stories are so powerful from that experience, and just simply like what Evan was saying, one of his mentors, Lenny's saying that he was exposed to like 30 people a day, every single day. I was exposed to 70 American arms and 70 Latin arms every single morning, and all of them walking through the building as if I'm like working at Bed Bath & Beyond on Black Friday, and they're all crushing the door, and like I gotta serve them all. And it's like, Aaron, I need a stretch. I'm like, I've got how much time? And then there's 140 of you. But when you stretch that many arms and that many differences in hypermobility or hypomobility or pain patterns and non-pain patterns, big, tall, skinny, large, whatever, you really get a strong database. And there's just multiple things that came from that experience, but the communication that you can have after like putting yourself out there on a limb to be around such elite people is, it's irreplaceable.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where, so getting that, you can call that a mentorship or that experience, I think it's really valuable. I know, and going back to the elite stuff that we've been through and we chose and traveled for and really had to interview for to get some of these internships. Evan was at Champion Sports Med up in Boston with Lenny and with Mike Reinhold, which is world class in their approach again with throwing arms for sure, and they have a gymnastics aspect to what they do and some phenomenal stuff. I'm sure you learned one or two things there.
Yeah, no, I learned a ton. I think to Aaron's point, I think the stories you come away with are incredibly helpful in your interactions, especially as a new therapist, because as a new therapist, I remember, and Aaron and I probably both maybe at that time looked a little young. And
we exaggerated the truth a couple times as well.
I mean, that's what it was. Like you get the question, you always get the question, how old are you really? And it's always like the 40 to 30. 50 to something year old person who's like, hey, how old are you? And it's like your first session. You're like, totally. I don't really know how to answer this. But if you can come up with a couple of stories, like a story like that, then I think that helps a ton. So I would always reference that as true clinical experiences, because I think it was. And then you can kind of lean on those people, like Mike and Lenny specifically had been kind of all over the world and done all kinds of different things. Mike had been with the Red Sox, and they'd both been with Kevin Wilk in Birmingham, and you can kind of lean on a lot of their stories and a lot of their experiences to help grow your bank a little bit, accelerate it a little bit.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think I got from that process was because Mike has done so much con ed stuff himself, he's just given all of these con ed courses by basically everybody else in our industry and in the strength and conditioning industry. And so he's got this big database of stuff. And so one thing I had when I went there was access to all of that. And so I was away from my wife and family and everybody was there by myself. So I had time to just like pour through this. So my time not at the clinic was like
Watching Red Sox games.
I did go to some
Yeah,
Red
Fenway.
Sox games.
Every
I had a great time. I had plenty of fun while I was there. But I spent tons of time just pouring through like Charlie Weingrass stuff and Mike Robertson stuff and Mike Boyle stuff. And I had to go spend time with Eric Cressy. So I really think it was my biggest thing I took away from that was my exposure to all of these other things, this big wide variety of things that influenced Mike and influenced Lenny, and then I kind of got to use to influence me.
I'm sure you spent a fair amount of time prepping for the interview, because I know I called you a few times where you were in Boston.
Probably
And
just had a beer
there's
at
right
Fenway or
hours of
something.
prep.
Oh, prepping for you.
Oh, yeah, for Mike phone call, yeah.
No. I was living in an Airbnb at the time, and the first time we chatted, one of my friends was actually visiting from Sacramento. He was in the room with me, and I didn't really prep.
Yeah,
a lot.
four beers deep, yeah. That's
Yeah,
good.
probably.
Fantastic.
That's why it went so
Candid
well. That's what we're doing
conversation.
right here.
Here we are. Yeah, exactly. Getting real.
Yeah.
No, so I think that's huge. I mean, I told you before, I was at Athletes Performance, and the stuff there was truly amazing from a coaching standpoint, athlete standpoint, for the same reasons these guys have said. I think Russ has an interesting history that's different too. That's not to say there's one way to do it, right? I think your history growing up with the martial arts and what you learned from that, from the sensei process and the clarity of how to learn, how to teach, how to carry yourself.
Yeah, that was.
I know carries through.
Yeah, my internship started as soon as I could. I had to pay for my own martial arts lessons, and I did it by teaching classes. And I definitely learned the soft science of influence and coaching through martial arts. I also learned, I kind of like laugh whenever someone says, well, here's the stretch to do. And they ask, well, how long should I hold the stretch? I just that like blows my mind whenever someone asks that. Do it until you can't go any further. I'm telling you, you need to be at 90 degrees. You're at 60. How about you just do it till you get to 90? How long is that? I don't fucking care. Like, well, how long would you do it for? I've done it for 3 hours before, and then I finally got there. Hurt like hell the next day, you did it again. So in martial arts, if you can't kick people in the head, well, you're in the wrong sport. You don't care enough about this. So I learned flexibility, speed, power by trying to develop it so I can kick the shit out of people. And that was kind of at a young age. And then what going back to like the residency and trying to seek out further education, the coolest thing about what we do for a living is predicated on science. Mm-hmm. And physics books, biomechanics books, chemistry books, pathophysiology books are pretty cheap. Science evolves. That's why we have Journal Club. That's why we have research. But if you get a good current textbook, you're going to learn a lot. So having a strong backbone in science is so critical. I mean, that's before residency, and that's really not in school. You need to do that more. So my grad school before physical therapy school was as a master's in biomechanics. And we dove deep. It was in the biomedical engineering department, UC Davis. And I had to study extremely hard in both science, engineering, and biomechanical principles and applying that to the human body. And so when I took a course on biomechanics in PT school, it was kind of like a quick synopsis of things that I spent 3 years in. And the point of it is there's so much science to dive into outside of school that really makes you special. And I would love it if someone kind of came to our group, an absolute specialist in healing. They knew the inside and out of everything regarding DNA and regeneration and tissue remodeling and both the nutritional factors and lifestyle factors and things that go into that. If you come in having that as a formative strength to your ability, we're going to go somewhere. You've got some interest. You have an interesting strength that not many people show. But I think the point is, people think that a residency is I'm going to become a great therapist by going to residency. Whatever your limiting factor is, attack it. For Tony, it was being in a weight room and speaking up. For me, I came at it I spoke up at age 13 teaching a class to 8-year-olds, so that wasn't my issue. I had to come at it after engineering school. I had to learn a lot of science and biology to ramp up my knowledge. But you got to find your own limiting factor and fill it, and that's your own personal residency.
That's
Yeah,
well said.
100%. Yeah, that's what we do every day.
Yeah.
Buy people's limiting factor, expose it,
Yeah.
make them feel like crap, and then build them back up.
Yeah.
The same thing would be true for us as professionals. And it's so true. So we look at, like we talked about, like kind of communication as a big factor, and if that's a weak area for you, then find a way to improve that. And that could be from just practicing communication, practicing speaking. Could be coaching is obviously a great way to do it, and kind of kill two birds with one stone. We talked about developing your hands as a skill set, which clearly there's residency programs for. My experience with those in particular is that I feel like the clinicians that come out of there immediately are not necessarily highly skilled, but they definitely have more and more tools. And then once they get this experience, those skills are honed quite nicely. So there's no question about that. And then there's the exercise progression, and I'd say just movement knowledge, which I don't know that's taught very well. I think maybe through a sports clinical residency, you're probably going to get more of that today as far as looking at movement screening and movement evaluation, perhaps more biomechanics and those things. But my fear is that in selecting that, to make sure that if that's a process you want to master, that you end up in a clinically relevant environment in that scenario, and you're not ending up in a research lab at a university, because that's probably not going to translate to what you can do in a typical clinic, because you're probably not going to have, a $30,000 piece of equipment to test somebody. You may not have a force plate. There's many tools you're not going to have that form the basis of some of those residency programs, so be cautious with that. And then be cautious too with the amount of time spent on-site emergency care. Not to say it's not valuable, but there are people who do that with the EMTs, with the athletic trainers. I think they do it very, very well. And I would support PTs in that role if that's the role you want to be in, but that's typically not the role we find ourselves in most clinical jobs.
And
So-
our licenses don't cover it.
Right.
Back to the exercise thing, though, what I did and what I think we all did to learn that was go to the strength and conditioning community.
Right.
I think the PT
Yeah.
community does a terrible job of teaching that. But I think the strength and conditioning community has mastered it.
Pretty much got it down.
Go
Yeah.
to the expert. That's where I went to learn. That's where I think all
Yeah.
of you guys went to learn that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think to Russ's point, you gain that scientific knowledge, gain that foundation, and you get some of that in school, and there's much more to gain. And then you start taking that and you start thinking about, okay, how would I challenge this tissue? How can I make the body adapt? We've talked about that before, and how critical that is. And that community of strength and conditioning, that's what it's all about. And we certainly don't talk about that enough in any of the rehab programs that I've seen. It just doesn't seem to be a focal point of addressing. So my experience was kind of like a top down, like I did a lot of strength conditioning stuff first, and then went into PT, and then it was easy for me because I was able to see the goal of strength conditioning and say, like, I can see if someone was to come to me in PT, I know what they were trying to accomplish. I know what we were going to go back to, so to speak. So it was easy for me to kind of start to draw a continuum or a plan to get a person to that point. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I see missing in clinicians as well, is what are we trying to accomplish at the end of the day? If this person wants to run again, how familiar are you with the biomechanics of sprinting and training a sprinter? Or if this person wants to play football again, how familiar are you with the fundamentals of that sport, or training that sport in the weight room, so that we can properly prepare them as a clinician for that event? And so again, for that reason, I think going to that community and being involved there it's epic to become a sports orthopedic PT for sure.
Yeah. I love that. I don't know why it resonated with me, but deconstruct their goal as I think about it. It's nice.
Yeah.
I don't know, just
just
had to simplify what you just said. Deconstruct your goal.
Yeah, that's the
Like I
foundation
think
of
about
it.
like teaching a younger therapist, and I think we've all had an opportunity to be a mentor for any of the clinicians in our own company, and it's how do you teach them to look ahead? And you could just simply listen to the client. Once you establish their goal, then when you're done with them, what you should do that night is deconstruct their goal all the way back down to where they are right now,
Right.
and then you have your pathway.
Yep. And I think that skill set requires you to know the end game,
Yes.
right? And then steps to take to get there. And I do think there's a lot of gray area there. Like if you just simply learn biology and then you learn pathology, but you really haven't learned training and impact and stress and adaptation at a high level, I think it's harder
Yeah.
to put that map in place.
But that roadmap will teach you where your deficits are. So you as a person can
Yeah.
find, okay, where am I deficient in? If I don't have a mentor around me in this current moment, let me try this simple exercise of let me meet a new person that comes in and sees me. Let me have them tell me their biggest goal they have in the PT process. And if can I deconstruct it with every single phase involved? And there's a gray area, and it's like, I need to learn more about that part of the human development process.
Yeah,
Which really is our movement continuum,
exactly.
right? Like it's, pain on the left, mobility, strength, speed, power, performance. It's exactly what it
Yeah.
is. You got to be able to master that whole thing. You got to be able to blend that from one side to the other. You couldn't deconstruct that without knowing all of those phases.
That's right.
That's what we believe in. That's what we've developed, and that's what we teach here at our facility and with our team is really how to see that continuum from start to finish, from pain to performance, and then be able to deconstruct it and look at these steps along the way to get them where they want to go. So I guess at the end of the day, I would say that the advice would be find a limiting factor, address it, and if that's one of those areas of whether communication, manual therapy, exercise progression, tissue adaptation, and then find ways to do it. I would say that my greatest advice would be to get around someone who does it really, really well. And if you were to ask me what's the best Con Ed course I can go to or what's the best way I could develop myself, I would fly to see whoever you think does that the best in the world and hang out with them for a week and just ask if you can shadow them and stay in the clinic and just watch them do what they do and ask them questions as you go through the process. And to me, that's how I would learn it the best. And maybe that's not so much for others, but I think that what I gained from my internships and it was the ability to do that, and that's what I did during that time. Was I found the best in the world at doing what they would do, and I followed them, and I took every chance I could get to be around some of the greats. So whether that be it was Mike Boyle, it was Don Chu, it was Mark Verstegen, it was Gray Cook, and being around those guys and watching them go through their process on the ground, and really my internships gave me that opportunity. So I didn't feel the need to get it somewhere else. But I'd say seek that and acquire it. However it is that you can get it done.
Well said.
But for us, that's one thing that we do offer is a mentorship program that does this and provides that need and really takes that kind of strength conditioning model as it applies to therapy. And then we work with our clinicians and really develop them along that way. Or we work with folks on the remotely as well that may not be part of our team. So if that interests you or if you see value in that, then that's something to reach out to us about, and we'd be happy and delighted to help for sure.
I had a question. Going to previous courses myself, and I'm as well as you guys, you can't help but notice, but sometimes the instructors have a lot of letters behind their name. And it's kind of like, one, why maybe you list all those? And two, do you need to have that many letters, and what does it maybe mean?
I mean, some of it is probably that if they're teaching a group, they want to prove that they've done, all of these things. They want to show some
I mean, to some point, you need a
Superiority or some
legend on
knowledge
all
base.
those acronyms to kind of look it up and okay, well, that means that means that.
Yeah.
And which
Well,
one
I
do you not
think the
have?
misnomer is it implies wisdom, and you typically see it for really young therapists. So that's conflict. I'm thinking of the wise old black belt that has all these accolades and can do all these things and just true wisdom, but that comes with experience. So I think the letters, I don't know. I think it's trying to replace experience, hard-won sweat equity into your craft with a lot of courses.
Now, if I look at the person and say they are an older individual that looks pretty seasoned, and they do have that many letters behind their name, there's probably some validity to how much wisdom and knowledge they have.
Yeah.
But I mean, to base someone's skill level solely on the alphabet behind their name is a bit debatable.
It might just be to prove that you've done all of those things, or just say that you've done them. I mean, you guys have taken lots of courses. Just throw all those. You have lots of search. Just throw all those letters after your name, right? And then the other piece of this is the cost portion of it is you don't really make more money with more letters after your name.
No.
Right, I love that when we were teaching with rock tape, one of the slides says, write the instructor name, and then afterwards says alphabet soup.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
this concept
Right.
of how many can you throw in there? And
Yeah.
I mean, we've certainly acquired, I don't know, I probably have 13 to 15 certifications over my career, but I only choose a few letters that, maybe have the most gravity, I
Yeah,
suppose, like maybe
yeah.
they're certainly the degrees from accredited universities and
Yes.
my CSCS, just because it's, I think it's the
It's
gold standard.
notoriety.
It's the gold standard in strength and conditioning, right? So, but other than that, I, kind of leave the rest of it off of there. They're usually specialty skills that you learn and acquire to develop a greater skill set overall. So yeah, I'm definitely not a fan of like seeing more letters the better. I know what you're talking about from an instructor standpoint. I was talking with one of our other therapists, Allie. We were talking about this last week, and it was interesting. We were talking about this drive for certifications that's been like the thing for medical professionals in our field for probably the last 15, 20 years, and getting more and more certifications. And some of her point was like she feels that this next class, and she's just over a year out of school at this point, so she's kind of got lots of colleagues that are in that phase, and that they're a little more interested in information rather than getting the cert to put the letters behind the name. And one of my counters to that, which maybe counter what you just said, Ev, is that some people work in a hospital setting actually do get paid more for having more certs.
That's true.
Just kind of like some
that's true.
fitness instructors actually get paid more by their fitness company by getting another certification. It bumps them up on the scale, right? If you have X certs, you get X payment. So I think that does happen to some degree. I don't think it's credible, or I don't think it's we don't do that.
But, I think a little tail into the marketing component of this is if you think, say, 25 years ago, how many different types of certifications existed for a typical person in our industry, and now fast track maybe 10 years ago, and then now 10 years ago. And I think that they've grown, they've become interesting and different, and I think there's possibly more marketing at stake here than actual science. That's my point. Because if it's not science, it's art. We do two things: science and art. And I'm not going to say because I saw Picasso, I'm now certified in Picasso. So it's kind of silly to certify art. And science is. It is. We're not arguing science. How many letters can say I know science? So if it's not science and art, then we're basically saying I followed a certain person's methodology that inevitably changes and grows and evolves. So it's dated. When you have some letters 5 years later, who cares? We're probably on to the next method of whoever's really, really popular.
That's a great point.
So for the newer therapists that are saying, maybe I'm not going to lean toward how many certs can I go to, how are they anticipating acquiring this knowledge? What are they going to do to advance their own learning and advance the way they can speak to people then?
Yeah, the great question. I don't have the answer to it, but I do think the way people take in information is interesting nowadays. In much more brief segments. For example, things like this, like a podcast, or things like Instagram, or it's amazing how people grab information from those things and it becomes factual, which is incredible to me.
Well, it's the iceberg, right? It's the iceberg. You get someone that's extremely intelligent. Maybe they do have a bunch of letters behind their name. Maybe they have zero, but they're extremely intelligent in a certain topic, and they can simplify it with very simple sentences. What the novice learner will do is they'll take those simple sentences, and that in its entirety is truth, rather than diving deeper and looking at what's below the water of the entire iceberg and finding out for themselves. So I think it's mildly dangerous to say that I don't want to go and get certified or whatever it is that you don't want to do and go to weekend courses, because you do dive deeper into that science. I could teach someone how to put tape on their knee. I could teach someone how to put tape on a patient's knee, but I'm not going to sit there and lecture them for about 4 hours like I do with rock tape courses on the deep sciences behind fascial anatomy and the autonomic nervous system and the gait theory and everything else that goes into the application of that tool.
Yeah, totally. What I could say confidently on this topic, and this is my personal experience, is that I've never seen a phenomenal clinician or a coach that has a lot of letters behind their name.
Fair.
So I could say that. And that doesn't mean I've seen everyone. I'm sure there's people that have great letters behind their names that are phenomenal coaches.
Yeah.
I just haven't seen one in my lifetime, in my training experience. So for me, that didn't necessarily devalue it, but it certainly showed to me that like maybe I don't have to pursue this alphabet soup behind my name, and that you can be great by truly being great and gaining that knowledge and practicing it, like get that experience.
It is ownership and of the basics, essentially. right? So if you go a ton of letters behind your name, it's like the pendulum swinging a little too far toward get as much information as you can. But
Right.
if you can't synthesize it
Yes.
to a simple approach, which is kind of what we're trying to do with our mentorship process, is let's take from good, solid minds in very specific subjects and understand the science, but then bring it together so you see it as a whole. Yeah, I think that's, like to your point, if you have a ton of letters.
So then the continual lifelong learner is less about, what's my next certification, but it should be about what's my next book, what's my next journal read,
Yeah.
what's my next experience. It is that. Who am I shadowing next? What great person am I going to listen to?
Yeah.
And less about, I got to find 4 more letters.
Yeah.
Which comes back to the point we made earlier, which is what's your limiting factor and what do you need to fill that?
Full circle, baby.
This is KIMEcast. Thanks for watching. This was KIMEcast, and we are the Keim Human Performance Institute. Thank you very much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation with you. Please hop on our social media. It's at KIMEHPI and engage with us there. If you'd like us to feature a topic or answer any questions live on the show, post your comments there. You can also check us out on our website at KIMEperformance.com, and there you can see links to content that we've posted throughout our podcast for more information.